Good afternoon and welcome to St. John's. We're broadcasting live from the School of Theology Seminary, and our honored guest today is Dr. Massimo Faggioli, a great scholar of the Second Vatican Council from Italy and now teaching at the University of St. Thomas just down the road from us here. And Massimo Faggioli is our guest speaker tonight, also being broadcast live, as you would know from the Pray Tell announcement. It's at 8:30 Eastern Standard Time this evening, so that's 7:30 here in Minnesota. And Dr. Faggioli is speaking on Sacrosanctum Concilium, Ecumenism, and the Church's relationship to the modern world. And all of this is happening on a very important day. December 4th is the 50th anniversary of the promulgation of Sacrosanctum Concilium, the Liturgy Constitution of the Second Vatican Council in 1963. So on this historic date, Massimo, I suppose the first question I want to ask you is, does Vatican II really matter anymore? That was then, this is now. We've both said that our undergrads sort of feel like it's sort of all in the past, somewhere back there with the Civil War and the Middle Ages, and it was important to an earlier generation. But would you say that Vatican II does have a continuing relevance, and how would you characterize that?
Well, it's a great temptation to think that Vatican II is a generational thing. So what is generational for sure is that passion of what was 50 years ago, the 60s, but the real strength of the Second Vatican Council is its theology. So if we look at the theology of the liturgical reform, at the theology of the revelation in Dei Verbum, at the ecclesiology, religious freedom, all these great documents, this is the Catholic Church. So we are still working at the implementation of some documents, of some consequences, but it's very hard to deny that we are not a church of the Second Vatican Council. Even if we think that we don't like Vatican II, we still live in the church of the Second Vatican Council.
Let's talk about the Liturgy Constitution. How much of that is a dated document and how much of that is still relevant today? The fact is, 50 years after Vatican II, the liturgical reform didn't seem to work in the sense that the whole church has united around it. Why didn't the reforms take? Why is there that much pushback, including from young people? Do you think that tells us that the reforms really weren't handled well and they were too extreme in one direction and the whole thing should have been done in a more moderate way? Or what is your appraisal of what Sacrosanctum Concilium got right or what it didn't as we look back on a 50-year troubled history?
Well, the liturgical reform of the Second Vatican Council is the most important and the biggest reform in the history of modern Catholicism, after Trent, so in these last 450 years. So for these big reforms, not everything works at the same time. So there are glitches, there are things. Overall, I think that the liturgical reform has permitted the theology of the Second Vatican Council to become part of the body of the Church. So if we think, for example, at the new role of the Bible, of the Scripture in the life of Catholics, that happened because of the liturgical reform. If we think at the new ecclesiology, so a new understanding of the Church within itself and in the modern world, that happens with a reformed liturgy. So I think that it's still working in this reform because now, 50 years after, we see much more clearly that this is really a globalized church. So in the 1960s, 70s, most Catholics thought, well, we are a global Catholic church, but the driving force is still Europe and North America. Now we know that that's not true now, and it will not be true. So the liturgical reform, just like for everything else of the Second Vatican Council, I think should be assessed not looking at that particular issue from Europe or from North America, but from very far from Rome. So from Latin America, Africa, Asia. If it worked there, it means that it will work here as well, even if there are things that are not perfect yet. So what is a particular problem of the liturgical reform in the northwest part of the world is that in these last few years we have seen some pushback in terms of the return to the Latin language, to the extraordinary form. I think that these are phenomena that must be taken seriously, but I don't think that they undermine the case made by the urgent need at Vatican II for the liturgical reform.
Good, thank you for that. I want to ask you what you make then of Summorum Pontificum. Pope Benedict issued this document in July of 2007, and I think his hope was that it would contribute to ongoing reform. It would help to expand our horizons, it would introduce new energies, there'd be a mutual complementarity. I sense that you have a different sense of all of that. So what was it like for you when the document landed in 2007, and what have you been thinking about it ever since?
Well, my personal experience was that that very morning, I mean, that Saturday of July 7, 2007, I was getting married in my parish in Italy. So I took that news as a reaction of Pope Benedict and some in his entourage for what they thought were extremes in the implementation of the liturgical reform. So my impression as a church historian is that those excessive experiments with the liturgy, they were more typical of the 1970s, probably. Mm-hmm. So I think that Summorum Pontificum tried to solve problems that were more typical 40 years ago than today. So what I'm concerned is that this motu proprio might create a bi-ritual church, a church with two souls, with two liturgical traditions that don't talk to each other. I think that might be a real problem. It's still early, so that motu proprio was published 6 years ago, so it's still very young for the standards of church history. But and I don't think that Pope Benedict meant to create a rift in the Catholic Church, but there are local situations sometimes when that happens. And I think that we should look at those situations carefully.
Good. Here's my last question. As you look forward, are you hopeful about the ongoing implementation of Vatican II? Do you think it's a legacy that's in danger? Do you think we have to work hard to defend it? Or do you think it's just an unstoppable force? Or what do you think the importance of Vatican II will be going forward?
Well, in these last 50 years, many things happened and many things changed in the world and in the church. So in this kind of a situation, we might think that Vatican II did not age quite well. Actually, I do think that it aged well. So if we look at the fundamental documents, we see that they still talk to our church. They say things to our church. I think that in the field of academic theology, we should rediscover Vatican II, those documents, those trajectories. I think that at the level of the pastoral church, the pastoral level, we should do something to make clear that the church of today is the church of the Second Vatican Council. So that it's in 1964-65, it was not obvious that an average lay Catholic could read the Bible. It was not obvious that we all thought that religious freedom was a good idea, or that ecumenism was the future of the church. Now we take these things as obvious things, but they come from Vatican II actually. So we should show people that these important theological ideas and experience, like reading the Bible, has an origin, and that event has enormous riches that are still the driving force in the Catholic Church of today, and I think in the future. The very election of Pope Francis, what he says, what he does, is very hard to separate from what Vatican II did.
Well, it sounds hopeful to me, and I'm sure you'll be saying much more on the same theme tonight. So do tune in tonight, 8:30 Eastern Time, 7:30 Central Time. Dr. Massimo Faggioli speaking on Sacrosanctum Concilium, Ecumenism, and the Church's relationship to the world on this 50th anniversary of the Vatican II Liturgy Constitution. Hope to see you there.
Thank you.